Hi all, this is Nelly from Ordinary People Saintly Souls, and I am continuing to read from the poem of the Man God, the book that contains the visions that Italian mystic Maria Valtorta had during the 1940s. And today I am at the episode of what I would call the Frigged victory. It is very famous, and I will tell you in a minute where to find it in the Bible. And I'm reading from my notes. I'm paraphrasing a lot, and sometimes I read from the text itself. So we are now on Tuesday of the week of the crucifixion, so the Holy Week, and it is very early in the morning. And Jesus talks to his apostles again what is ahead of him. He's trying to prepare them, but it is really hard because, as usual, they try to convince him to save himself. Peter says, "Why don't you go to Lazarus? That would not be fleeing, but you would not be touched there." And Judas throws himself at Jesus' feet and says, "I beg you, Lord, do that." After staring at Judas for a while, Jesus jumps up and says, "So that you can have Lazarus arrested as well? So to have a double prey, a double joy? No, Lazarus has to be kept for the future Christ, the triumphant one." Then Jesus says, "Leave me alone. I want to pray and I want to speak to my Father." But they don't want him to be alone, and they don't want to leave him. And then he says, "Can't I be alone for a while, just with my Father's angels?" And Judas then sticks to Peter and wants to know where they will be going the next day. Again, he's fishing for info to figure out where they can capture Jesus. Because remember, Passover is coming, so it has to be done before the feast. Now we come to a part of the readings where the apostles must have been paying quite close attention, and we can also see that Jesus several times repeated his messages. Because if we look in the New Testament, then we see that a lot has been written that really follows what Maria Valtorta saw, or the other way around. What she saw is actually pretty much accurate in the New Testament, in the Gospel. So the story of the fig tree that was cursed is in Matthew 21st chapter, verses 18 to 22, and you can also find it in the book of Mark, the 11th chapter, verses 12 to 14. So the day before, they had passed the fig tree, and seeing that it had no fruit but just foliage and leaves, Jesus had cursed it. And so when the apostles pass it and see that it is totally withered, they are absolutely stunned. And Jesus comments on the symbolism of the fact that the tree is really completely dead. First of all, it is about the importance of bearing fruit and the consequences of spiritual barrenness. When you're spiritually barren, then it leads to nothing. Now, like I say, the story pretty much resembles what's in the New Testament, but I will read for you what Valtorta exactly heard Jesus say. He says, "The tree has no more sap. You are right. And something dies when it has no more sap, both in a plant, but also in a nation and a religion. There is only hard bark and useless foliage, ferocity and hypocrisy on the outside. The white internal sap that is full of lymph corresponds to holiness, to spirituality. The hard bark and useless foliage correspond to mankind or humanity devoid of just spiritual life. Woe to the religions that become human, because the priests and the believers no longer have a vital spirit. Woe to the nations whose leaders are nothing but fierceness and resounding clamor, without having fruit-bearing ideas. And woe to people who lack the life of the Spirit. At that moment, Judas says, whoa, you better not say this in front of the Jewish leaders, because that would be dumb. Mind your words. And then he philosophizes, there is the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of the Spirit. Jesus just ignores him, and the disciples ask him if he is the one who truly killed the tree. And then we get the famous passage where Jesus says that everything is possible with prayer, that you can move mountains if you truly believe and pray sincerely. That makes Judas react as well. He says, whoa, that would make us look like magicians. We'd look like fools. But Jesus just repeats it. He says, whatever you ask for in prayer, have faith. You will get an answer, especially when the prayer is done with a pure heart. So then, it's still Tuesday, they're going back to the temple. And there we see again several famous parts of the New Testament. And Jesus teaches and talks up a storm again. He heals many of the sick. You know, he now heals them in groups, in bunches, because he no longer has time to heal them one by one. And at the same time, strangely enough, there are people who do not treat him very well. For example, he's being pushed. He's almost run over by a horse. And one guy called Zadok tries to drive his cart into Jesus at great speed. So I'm going to stop this part here for today. And the next one is about the very famous story about the poor widow and the 2 coins that she gives. This was Nelly van Doorn for Ordinary People, Saintly Souls. Thank you for listening. Bye.